The air in the Tactical Operations Center was thick with the biting chill of processed air and the heavier weight of unspoken fear. Brigadier General Thorne, a man whose career was built on political maneuvering far from the grit of the front lines, stared at the holographic map. His voice, when it came, was as sterile as the room around him. Negative. No air assets will be diverted to support call sign Reaper. They are east of the demarcation line. It's a non-permissive environment. On the other side of the world, huddled in the jagged rocks of a desolate canyon system deep in an unnamed border region, the men of SEAL Team Reaper heard those words not as military jargon, but as a death sentence. Lieutenant Commander Jackson "Jax" Rourke, the team's leader, clicked off the comms, his knuckles white. The setting sun painted the desolate landscape in hues of blood and rust, a grimly beautiful backdrop for their impending annihilation. Enemy T-90 tanks, lumbering beasts of steel, were grinding their way up the valley, their engines a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very rock they used for cover. Behind them, waves of infantry, armed to the teeth, fanned out, their movements methodical and terrifyingly certain. "So that's it, then," Specialist Cade McNamara muttered, checking the last magazine for his saw. "High Command's writing us off." Jax didn't answer. He scanned the faces of his men, young, tough, and now impossibly isolated. They had been sent on a deniable operation, a quick in and out to recon a new breed of surface-to-air missile system. But their intelligence had been fatally flawed. The mission had gone sideways from the moment they'd touched down, and now, with their exfil compromised and their position overrun, they were little more than ghosts in a graveyard. They were clinging to the thinnest sliver of hope, a desperate prayer that something, anything, would intervene before the enemy's final push. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows of the closing armor stretched toward them like grasping fingers. For SEAL Team Reaper, the world had shrunk to this rocky outcrop, and the end was coming with the unforgiving certainty of the tide. Miles away, in the relative safety of a sprawling forward operating base, the same transmission crackled through a dusty speaker in a forgotten corner of the airfield. Hangar 13 was a purgatory for machines, and as it turned out, for people. Captain Eva Valkyrie Rostova stood in the cavernous space, the scent of stale hydraulic fluid and old metal, a familiar perfume. Before her rested the last of her kind on this base, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately and unflatteringly known as the Warthog. It was a derelict, a museum piece slated for decommissioning, its iconic shark-toothed maw faded and peeling. Eva, too, was a relic. Once the squadron's ace, a pilot whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear by those who had seen her fly. She had been grounded. A mission a year prior, one where she had made a call that saved a downed pilot but embarrassed a high-ranking official, had seen her unofficially erased. Buried under a mountain of paperwork, her name removed from active flight rosters, she had become a ghost in her own right. General Thorne, the very man who had just condemned Reaper Team to death, had been the architect of her professional demise. He saw her as a reckless liability, a relic of a more aggressive, less politically correct era of warfare. The Warthog before her was a mirror of her own situation. It was deemed too slow, too ugly, too antiquated for modern, sterile warfare. Yet as Eva ran a hand over its scarred fuselage, she felt the familiar thrum of its dormant power. The machine was a brute, built around the most terrifying airborne cannon ever created, the GAU-8 Avenger. It was designed for one purpose, to kill tanks and save the lives of the soldiers on the ground. No order, no political maneuvering could silence the deep-seated instinct that roared to life within her. The decision wasn't even a conscious thought. It was a primal certainty. She would fly. Her career was already a ghost. What was one more act of defiance in the face of oblivion? She belonged in the sky, and there were men dying who needed what only she and this forgotten beast could provide. For Reaper Team, the final moments had arrived. They had formed a tight perimeter, every man conserving his last rounds for the inevitable charge. The guttural roar of the enemy tanks was now deafening, the ground shaking with their advance. Jax raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at the lead tank as it crested the ridge. This was it, the final stand. Then a new sound split the air. It wasn't the shriek of a modern fighter jet, but a low, menacing thunder that seemed to tear the fabric of the sky. From the hazy twilight, a shape emerged, silhouetted against the blood-red clouds. It was ugly, angular, and utterly terrifying. The A-10 Warthog, a snarling beast of a plane, burst into view, its twin engines screaming. The shark mouth painted on its nose seemed to curl into a predatory grin. And then came the roar. It was not the sound of an explosion, but something far more primal, an apocalyptic fury that ripped through the valley. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up, and the world dissolved into a storm of fire and sound. A stream of 30mm depleted uranium shells, fired at a rate of nearly 70 rounds per second, slammed into the lead T-90. The tank didn't just explode, it ceased to exist, erupting in a geyser of white-hot metal and flame. The Warthog screamed overhead, the cannon's roar echoing off the canyon walls as it lined up its next target. Another tank, and then a third, were shredded into burning heaps of scrap. Infantry scrambled for cover as the earth around them was churned into a maelstrom of dust and shrapnel. The SEALs, who had been seconds from death, could only stare in stunned awe. The sky they had believed was their enemy, the empty expanse that had offered no hope, was now raining down a brutal, beautiful salvation. This wasn't the surgical precision of a drone strike. This was raw, untamed power. It was a statement. The forgotten pilot had returned, and she was rewriting General Thorne's commands in fire and steel. Back in the TOC, chaos erupted. The screens that had moments before shown the inexorable advance of enemy armor now displayed blooming fireballs and scattering infantry. General Thorne's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into incandescent rage. "Who the hell is that? I gave a direct order, get me a call sign, now." An operator, his face pale, turned from his console. "Sir, the IFF is broadcasting from a decommissioned airframe. The transponder is registered to Captain Rostova." Thorne's blood ran cold. Rostova. The ghost he had tried to bury. "Get her on the comms. Order her to stand down and return to base immediately. That is a direct order." In the cockpit of the Warthog, Eva heard the frantic calls. She ignored them. Her world had narrowed to the men on the ground and the enemy in her sights. To her, the only voices that mattered were the ones trapped and fighting for their lives. She banked the lumbering jet, her eyes scanning the terrain. She spotted the telltale glint of an anti-aircraft battery setting up on a nearby ridge. With a viciously short burst from the Avenger, she turned the position into a smoking crater. Then she systematically began to dismantle the enemy's armored line, her attacks brutally efficient, buying Reaper Team the space they desperately needed to breathe, to regroup. On the ground, the SEALs listened to the open comms chatter, a mixture of awe and disbelief on their faces. They heard Thorne's furious demands and the ghost pilot's defiant silence. Whispers began to circulate among the beleaguered operators. "It's Valkyrie," Mac breathed, a name he hadn't heard in over a year. "They said she was gone." The legend of the ghost pilot, the one who was supposed to have been erased, was being reborn in the heart of the battle. The enemy, initially thrown into disarray, began to recover. They were professionals and they adapted quickly. Mobile SA-13 Gopher units, far more sophisticated than the crude anti-aircraft guns she had already destroyed, began to light up her radar. A warning tone shrieked in her headset. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" Eva threw the Warthog into a gut-wrenching dive, pulling Gs that would have torn a lesser airframe apart. The missile screamed past, feet from her canopy. She dodged another by sheer instinct, but her luck couldn't hold. A third missile exploded just off her right wing. The concussion slammed into the A-10, and shrapnel ripped through the fuselage. The jet shuddered violently, a deep groan of tortured metal echoing through the cockpit. Warning lights flashed across her console like a crazed Christmas tree. The right engine was sputtering, and a thick black line of smoke trailed behind her. Hydraulics were bleeding out, the controls growing sluggish and heavy in her hands. Every instinct screamed at her to disengage, to run for the safety of friendly airspace. But down below, Reaper team was still engaged, still fighting for their lives. Every second she could keep the enemy's attention focused on her was another second they were alive. Back in the talk, Thorne watched the telemetry from her damaged aircraft, his fury now tinged with a cold, calculating fear. If she went down, it would be a tragic but politically convenient end to a career he had already sabotaged. But if she succeeded, if she managed to save Reaper team against his direct order, she would expose his cowardice, his political calculus that had nearly cost the lives of elite operators, to the entire theater of command. His reputation would be in ruins. He needed her to fail, but he couldn't be the one to order her destruction. He could only watch, a prisoner of his own ambition, as the wounded Warthog continued its defiant dance of death. The Warthog was dying. Eva's fuel gauge was screaming at her, and her ammunition counter was perilously low. She couldn't stay in the fight much longer, but leaving Reaper team now would be a death sentence. Her mind raced, searching for an option, any option, and then she remembered. A semi-abandoned forward arming and refueling point, or FARP, codenamed Last Chance. It was little more than a rough, unpaved strip of dirt and asphalt, manned by a skeleton crew of mechanics and ground crew who were known for their unconventional methods. She keyed her comms, bypassing the command channels and using a private frequency. "Last Chance, this is Valkyrie. I'm coming in hot. I need gas and guns, and I need them yesterday." On the ground at the FARP, Master Sergeant Alistair "Gunny" Ward heard the call. He was a grizzled veteran, a man who had more grease under his fingernails than most pilots had flight hours. He looked at his ragtag crew, a collection of misfits and mavericks who, like him, had been sent to this forgotten outpost to be out of sight and out of mind. "You heard the lady," he grunted. "Let's get ready to rock and roll." As Eva brought the wounded Warthog in for a landing, a convoy of military police vehicles, dispatched by the furious General Thorne, roared onto the airstrip, sirens blaring, trying to block her path. But Gunny Ward was having none of it. He and his crew, armed with nothing more than wrenches and Defiance, stood in their way. "This is an active runway," Gunny roared at the MP lieutenant. "You will clear this area, or I will have you all up on charges for interfering with a combat operation." Under the cover of the deepening darkness, Gunny's crew worked with a desperate, practiced efficiency. They swarmed the A-10, refueling its tanks and loading fresh belts of 30mm ammunition into the Avenger's massive drum. Eva stayed in the cockpit, the engines still running, in a hot pit refuel that was as dangerous as it was unorthodox. The MPs argued and threatened, but Gunny's Defiance held them at bay. With fresh fuel in its tanks and a full complement of ammunition, the wounded Warthog, its engines screaming, clawed its way back into the night sky, ready for one more round. The enemy had used the Warthog's brief absence to reposition their most dangerous asset, a sophisticated radar-guided SA-15 Gauntlet missile launcher. As Eva re-entered the valley, a new, more menacing tone filled her headset. This wasn't a simple heat seeker. This was a guided missile with a brain. It had a lock on her, and it wouldn't be easily shaken. There was no outrunning it, no outclimbing it in her damaged jet. She had only one option, a desperate gamble that bordered on suicide. As the missile streaked towards her, she cut her throttle, dumping all her speed and dropping altitude until she was skimming the canyon floor. The missile, programmed to intercept her at a much higher speed and altitude, roared over her head, its proximity fuse failing to detonate. For a terrifying second, she was in the clear. But the missile was smart. It reacquired her, looping back for another pass. Eva pushed the Warthog to its absolute limits, weaving through the jagged rock formations of the canyon. Shrapnel from the near miss had torn through her nose cone, and the wind screamed through the shattered canopy. Just as the missile closed in for the kill, she made her move. She slammed the throttle to full, pulling the Warthog up into a near vertical climb. The missile, unable to compensate for the sudden change in trajectory, overshot her by inches. It was the opening she needed. Before the launcher could reload, she rolled the Warthog over, diving towards the SAM site. Despite the destruction of the SAM site, Reaper team was still in a desperate situation. They were pinned down from three sides, their own ammunition now dangerously low. The enemy, though battered, was still a formidable force. Eva checked her own gauges. The fuel was little more than fumes, and the ammunition counter showed a paltry 120 rounds left. It was enough for one last, brutally short pass. She took a deep breath, her voice calm as she spoke over the comms to Jax. "Reaper, this is Valkyrie. I've got one pass left. Make it count." She pushed the Warthog into a steep dive, the ground rushing up to meet her. She ignored the warning alarms, the protesting groans of the damaged airframe. Her focus was absolute. She lined up on the densest concentration of enemy infantry and light-armored vehicles, the heart of the force that was pinning the SEALs down. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. "Now, Jax!" she yelled. On the ground, the SEALs opened up with everything they had, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down. And then, Eva fired. She held the trigger down, unleashing the last of the Avenger's fury. The final 120 rounds tore into the enemy's position, a 2-second burst of unimaginable destruction. The valley erupted in a cataclysm of fire and explosions. Armor was shredded, infantry lines shattered. The survivors, their will broken, scattered and fled into the darkness. Against all odds, in the silence that followed the Warthog's final roar, SEAL Team Reaper found themselves in control of the battlefield. The immediate threat was gone, broken by the ferocity of a single pilot in an ancient jet. As the cheers of the victorious SEALs echoed up from the valley floor, the Warthog staggered through the sky above them. It was a crippled beast, mortally wounded but stubbornly refusing to die. One engine was now completely out, the other sputtering and trailing thick black smoke. The hydraulics were all but gone, and Eva was fighting a jet that seemed determined to fall out of the sky. She turned the nose of the dying plane towards Last Chance, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the controls. Every warning light was flashing, every alarm blaring. She was flying on pure muscle and willpower. As she approached the rough airstrip, she knew a normal landing was impossible. She would have to bring it in hard and fast, a controlled crash. The Warthog hit the cracked asphalt with a bone-jarring impact, skidding and sparking down the runway. A tire blew, sending the jet slewing sideways, a wingtip scraping the ground in a shower of sparks. But it held together, battered, broken, but in one piece. When the dust finally settled and the tortured groan of metal faded, Gunny Ward was the first to the cockpit. He looked up at Eva, her face streaked with sweat and grime, her eyes burning with an intensity that defied exhaustion. He offered a simple, quiet salute. "Welcome home, Hog." In the sterile confines of the Teos, General Thorne stared at the radar feeds with a hollow, defeated expression. His order of no air support had been utterly and completely obliterated by a single woman, and a jet he had dismissed as obsolete. He had been outmaneuvered, not by an enemy general, but by the courage and defiance of one of his own. In the shattered ruins of the canyon, the men of Reaper Team breathed air they never thought they would taste again. They were alive because of the ghost pilot who had refused to let them die. Lieutenant Commander Rourke looked up at the night sky, offering a silent, profound thank you to the unknown pilot who had risked everything for them. Back at Last Chance, as Eva finally climbed down from the cockpit, her helmet off, the exhaustion hit her like a physical blow, but it was overshadowed by a powerful realization. She had been pushed aside, buried in paperwork, and officially forgotten. But she had never truly been gone. She was, and always had been, the one who showed up when all hope was lost. This story, while a work of fiction, touches upon a profound truth. True honor and courage are not found in blindly following orders, but in having the strength to do what is right, even when it comes at a great personal cost. Eva Valkyrie. Rostova reminds us that one person's refusal to accept an unjust reality can change the course of events. Her story is a testament to the idea that our true worth is not defined by the roles others assign to us, but by the choices we make when faced with adversity. In our own lives, we may not face enemy tanks, but we all encounter moments where we must choose between the easy path of compliance and the harder path of conviction. What does it truly mean to be a hero? Is it about following the rules, or is it about knowing when to break them for a greater good? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between what you were told to do and what you knew was right? Thank you for joining me on this journey. I wish you all good health and the courage to be your own hero. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel for more tales of defiance and valor.